Hello, and welcome to Charted, an astrology podcast. My name's James, and today we're going to talk about Venus. So in the last episode, we talked about Mercury, the first of the two inner planets, and so now we're going to talk about Venus, which is the second. And we're going to look at kind of the same way, this dynamic of how Venus acts as kind of an intermediary between the sun and the moon, and what it's going to represent as that intermediary. Now, there's obviously some very distinct differences. The first being that Venus is not neutral, right? With Mercury, we looked at it. It's a very neutral planet. It needs to be. The nature of what it's doing requires neutrality. But with Venus, not so much. So Venus is actually a feminine planet. It's the first gendered planet we've really run into. I guess technically the moon and sun are gendered. I don't know if I discussed that too much, but Venus is very much feminine. And masculinity and femininity in the zodiac, I haven't really talked about it too much, but the feminine looks inward. It is receptive, right? Whereas the masculine projects outward, beyond the self, going out into the world. And so the feminine qualities within the zodiac are going to kind of embody that receptiveness. And so we'll see that with Venus. We'll see it in the astronomy too, which we'll get to. And the other thing is Venus is a benefic planet, right? Mercury was neutral. It takes on the qualities of the planets around. But now we come to our first benefic. So the two benefics are Venus and Jupiter. The two malefics are Mars and Saturn. Now, why are they benefic? Why are they malefic? Why do they get those terms? Well, they don't really mean like good or evil. I know that's kind of how it sounds based on their terminology, but really that's just a kind of I don't know if it's bad translation or just the way those words were used back when they came up with those terms back in the ancient times. It doesn't really fit the way we would use those terms. So really a better way to think about them is, are they soft or are they harsh? Do the qualities that they represent apply more softly, more beneficially, or do they come with more difficulty and hardship in order to get the results? Because all planets can provide good things. It's just a matter of how easily you can get those good things from them. With the benefics, they tend to give those good things with minimal effort, sometimes for free. With the malefic planets, the good qualities kind of only come once you work for it. And they each have their separate ways of working for it. But they also provide good things for us. They just deal with qualities that tend to be a bit more harsh, rough around the edges. So when you think of benefic, when you think of malefic, think of free-giving and soft, or more demanding and harsh. So let's look first then at the astronomy of Venus and get a sense for why we can say some of the things that we say about it. Number one, it is obviously an inner planet, which means it's going to be close to the sun. So it's going to deal with something solar, much like Mercury. It is an expression or an extension of the solar self. That is the conscious, the soul, the spirit, however you want to term it. And kind of helping it translate something, move some part of that self into the physical realm, right? As well as applying those same qualities from the physical world and allowing them to filter back up to the solar self. So that's what Venus is. Now, because it's attached to the sun, or rather it's an inner planet, right? We can see its full orbit as it moves around the zodiac, which means we get to watch it retrograde in a different pattern than the outer planets. Now, in the case of Mercury, it was, a couple times a year. With Venus, though, it's more intricate. It has a very, very unique and tight retrograde cycle. It's exceedingly consistent, and it makes a very geometrically pleasing pattern. What do I mean? Well, Venus retrogrades every 8 years, or 5 times every 8 years, sorry. And each of those 5 points where it will go retrograde, if you were to mark them on a chart, on a zodiac chart, they would make a 5-point star, almost exactly, like very geometrically nearly perfect. Each of those 5 points would also retrograde in the same exact spots, but minus 1 degree every 8 years. For example, we had a Venus retrograde earlier this year, 2025, back in the spring, with Venus, when Venus was in Aries. It went retrograde, I forget the exact degree, but I believe it was about 10, right? Let's just say 10 for the sake of the example. So it went retrograde at about 10 degrees Aries, which means in 8 years' time, it will retrograde at 9 degrees Aries, right? And so that spot will continue, and then 8 years after that, right? So 16 years from now, it'll be at 8 degrees Aries. And then another 8 years, it'll be 7, and so forth. And each of those 5 points has that same thing going on. So you see this kind of star-shaped pattern slowly and methodically move its way backwards through the zodiac. And so that cycle is very tight, very consistent, and reliable. And so much like the moon, Venus has this quality to it that is reliable, consistent, right? As well as it's geometrically very pristine, right, and orderly. Now, one other thing with Venus is an exceptionally bright star. You can actually see Venus kind of at the tail end of sunset. A lot of times it will actually show up in the sky prior to the sun fully going down. I've never checked this, but I bet in the morning it's probably somewhat similar if it's a morning Venus. So it's very bright. And we see this with the benefic and malefic planets. The benefic planets are very bright. They kind of look like your regular stars, except just bright. And then the malefic planets kind of don't. They kind of look grungy, right? Saturn is this kind of dull, dingy color. Mars is red. So they don't look too comforting. And that's part of why we consider them benefic and malefic, or at least part of the physical signification for that. So if we put all of this together then, right, with Venus, we have this very orderly retrograde cycle. We've got this attachment to the sun. We've got the feminine quality. And what can we say? Why is Venus feminine? Well, obviously it's a benefic, but Jupiter's a benefic. It's kind of more masculine. But really, if we look at the order of the planets, and what do we see? We have the sun, right, the consciousness. You have Mercury. Okay, it's truly neutral. It's the translator. And then you have Venus. And then you have the moon. And the moon is the reflection of the conscious self into the real world. So that dynamic between the sun and the moon is kind of like going from the spiritual self to the physical self. And then anything beyond is dealing with stuff beyond the self. That means Venus is the first step inward from the physical self. Mars is the first step after, right? Mars is the first planet after the moon. And when I say moon, if you're looking at it from the order of the planets, really it's Earth, but moon orbits Earth. So that's why I say moon is between Venus and Mars. So you have the masculine going out from the moon and the Venus, the feminine, going inward from the moon, back towards the conscious, back towards the soul. So that's why Venus represents femininity, the female. Now, what else can we say it represents? Well, if you've studied astrology, or even if you haven't, you've probably heard Venus is often associated with love, with beauty. And that is going to be true, but there's more of an underlying reason for that. And if we really sum up what Venus represents, it's going to be value or valuation. Now, how did I get there? Well, it's because Venus is an extension of the sun, but it is the feminine dynamic, right? It is looking inward back at the sun in that kind of zone, right? That interplanet zone I was talking about. And what is the sun? The sun is the self, right? It's me. It's my identity. It's the core. And in order to have a core, right, in order to have a sense of self that is worthwhile, that is functional, one of the foundational things we need to have is a sense of worth, a sense of value. So value is kind of the dynamic that Venus represents in terms of supporting the sun. It is reflecting the value of the sun, this value of the self. And so when we value ourselves, what do we have? We have an ability to have a strong sense of who we are. Our potential increases. Our light increases. If we think of the sun, if we've got a lot of gas, maybe that might be a bad metaphor, but if you want to shine your light really brightly in the world, what do you got to do? You got to believe in yourself, right? And how are you going to believe in yourself? The first thing you have to do is you have to accept that you have some sense of worth, some sense of value that makes it worthwhile to believe in yourself. Is there a reason to believe in yourself? And that reason comes from our sense of value, our sense of self-worth. And so that's the very starting point of what Venus reflects. But it's a feminine planet, which means it's receptive, right? And so it's going to receive that same thing from the world. And I'll come to this in a moment. We'll expand on this a lot. So Venus represents value, which means it's going to also represent how we value, right? How do I value myself? How do I value the things that I find important? Again, the sun wants to drive the ship, right? Wherever the sun goes, the planets must follow. But how does the sun know what's important in life? How does it know what it desires, where it wants to go? That's what Venus is representing. Because if it understands its own value, if it understands how to value other things by the way it measures itself, right, it can see the kinds of things it wants to be around, the kinds of things it wants to do. If I look at myself and I say, I am a tremendous plumber, right? I know I have the skills to be the best plumber there is, right? I can sense that value in myself and I believe it. Well, then the natural outflow of that is, okay, I'm going to go be a plumber, right? I wouldn't say, oh, I have this tremendous skill as a plumber, but then spend my life going after, trying to be a carpenter or trying to be a computer scientist or trying to be a musician when I've determined that my value, my worth is in something entirely different, right? And so this is what Venus is representing. It's dealing with this sense of how do I value myself, right? How valuable am I, right? And that directly influences how we see ourselves, our sense of security, our sense of who we are. Security is going to be another thing, right? The moon really wants safety because it's emotional, it's subconscious. It's about nurturing. And so another aspect of value is safe, stability, consistency, right? And that ties back also into the sun. How can we have a confident sense of self if that sense of self is very unstable, right? If the values that self is built upon are always changing, always fluctuating, going up and down with, the passage of time, with the difficulties of life, how do we have a strong, stable sense of self? We can't. It'll be unstable. And so Venus, by its nature, wants to facilitate that sense of stability. Why? By having a consistent set of values. So the way in which we value ourselves, the way in which we value things, there's going to be a consistency to it. Because that consistency allows for the sun and moon to kind of find a sense of stability, each that they need in different ways. So then if Venus is going to show how we value things in the world, the natural outflow of that then is going to be the things we desire. Because if we find something valuable, what do? We want it, right? So Venus represents our wants, but not wants in a need kind of a sense. That's more the moon. The moon is more of our needs, our emotional needs, our physical needs. But Venus is going to be the things we find valuable for whatever reason, right? I like Italian food, right? So we find this pasta. This pasta is delicious. I want it. Why? Because I find value in it. And what's that value? It tastes good. Or maybe you have a tool, a hammer. You really like this hammer, this brand. Why? Because you see it as valuable. You think it's better tool than the others, right? It has a function that you find worthwhile in having. And that same sense of value extends to other things, right? It could be tools, food, clothes, what we wear, whatever. It could be anything and for any reason. But Venus is that process of how we figure out what we value and therefore what we enjoy, what we find pleasurable, which means Venus is going to represent those things, the things that we find enjoyable, the things we find pleasurable. So Venus can be very sensual, right? Again, that's just a natural kind of outflow of this valuation process. Now, what about people? Right? I mentioned earlier that Venus is often kind of referred to as the planet of love and beauty. Well, beauty is pretty easy. That's a natural extension of what? Value. If I value myself, right, value my physical body, what am I going to do? I'm going to make it look nice, right? If I value being beautiful, if that I see that as a worthwhile thing, I'm naturally going to try and be beautiful, right? Make myself look as beautiful as possible. Things that are beautiful to me, right, are things I may value. I may value them for their physical beauty, or I may value them for their functional beauty, right? That'd be a Capricorn Venus, maybe. Right? This tool has a good purpose. It's a really good tool. Maybe it doesn't look so nice, but you know what? I love its functionality. That is a very Venus concept, right? I value it because of something. And it's not about beauty, it's about value. But beauty is just a kind of a form that can take. But what about love and relationships then? Well, this is where Venus is really supporting the lunar aspect of things. Because what does the moon want to do? It wants to connect, right? It wants to connect to things. But you can't connect to something if you don't have a way to be around it in the first place. You don't have some kind of initial kind of gravitational pull. You think of the moon with the Earth. Was the moon attached to? It's attached to the Earth, right? That's the thing it's orbiting. It's gotten close to it. But in order to have gotten close to it, at some point in time, it would have had to have something to attract it. And so Venus represents that attractive quality. If I want something, or I want to be with somebody that matches my values, what do? I attract them. That's the feminine quality kind of showing through. And it also goes to the concept of, hey, you tend to become the things you are around. So if you have a specific, again, going back to the solar, you have a specific identity and you want to be something, what are you going to naturally do? You're going to attract the kind of people that value who you are. So if you have a strong sense of self-worth, you're going to attract people that value that, right? Value that confidence, whatever else kind of outflows from it. Whereas if you have a low self-worth, what are you going to value? What are you going to attract? People don't care about you, right? Because you're presenting yourself as such. Conversely, in terms of relationships, what is Venus deals with our ability to kind of relate, right? Because it's the way we interact with the things we find valuable, whether it's people, tools, food, whatever it is. So if we don't have a strong sense of worth for something, how are we going to relate to it? We're not really going to care about it, right? But if we value something highly, really highly, what are we going to want to do? We're going to want to be around it. We're going to attract it to us. We're going to try and make sure we're around it, and we want it to like us as much as we like it. Because when there's that mutual sense of value, now the connection can grow. The connection can happen. Because I can have all the value in the world for, say, a celebrity, but if they don't think anything of me, no connection is ever going to form. Doesn't matter how much I try and stalk them, creep on them, whatever. If they don't want a part of me, right? I don't show off my worth to them. No amount of desire on my part ever really forms that connection. So you have to have a mutual sense of value. And then love really is just kind of the ultimate what's the word? I don't want to say transcendence, but it's kind of the ultimate tier, the ultimate layer of this valuation, right? When you value something so much, you're willing to put aside other aspects of yourself, because that's what love is. It's having a connection to something. It's going beyond that just relational, I value this process, to now I have a connection to it in a way where I'm willing to give up myself a little bit for it. And the more you love something, the more you're willing to give up, the more you're willing to simply say, hey, I will do anything for you. And we'll see this kind of love dynamic as we look at Venus in the signs that it rules and whatnot. But Venus rules love because it starts with the valuation. It starts with the, do I value these people? If I value them, I'm going to take care of them, right? I'm going to support them. So one other thing that Venus rules is the idea of peace and harmony. And I would say artisticness is definitely a Venus quality, but again, that's just what? It's just an expression of our sense of worth, our sense of value kind of outflowing. And since beauty is natural kind of form of that, that's why Venus tends to represent the arts and artistry and creativity, because it's an outflow of the creative side of the sun. Because what is it doing? It's about expressing something. Now, what about this idea of peace? Where does this come in? Well, peace comes because there's harmony. And harmony comes because two people look at each other and say, I value you and you value me, which means even if we have differing, conflicting points of view, we have something in each other that we value and don't want to break. So therefore, we'll put aside our differences and work together. That's what's going on when you have peace of any kind, whether it's, handshake between two businessmen or whether it's peace between countries that hate each other, right? They're ultimately coming together because now there's a mutual sense of, hey, we have something we value in each other. Let's shake hands, put aside our differences. Now, obviously, if you look at history, peace often is kind of thrust and forced upon conquered civilizations, and that's a different topic for a different day. But this idea of peace really just comes from harmony, right? We're willing to put aside our differences so we can work harmoniously with things for a reason, right? Because we have a mutual sense of value on something. So to sum up, I've said this word a billion times at this point, but Venus is about value. It's about how we value ourselves and all the things that kind of outflow from that. That's going to lead to our self-worth, etc. It's how we value other people and other things, which means it's going to represent the things we find enjoyable, things we find pleasing, the qualities that we find enjoyable and attractive, right? Because the things we value, we're going to be attracted to, which means the natural dynamic is Venus represents how we attract things, how we show off our sense of value, which means Venus represents artistry, the arts, and any form of self-expression, because what is that? It's a form of showing off my worth, showing off who I am. In terms of the signs that Venus rules Taurus, and it rules Libra. Let's talk about Taurus first. So Taurus is a fixed earth sign, right? It's very stable, very safe. It's being ruled by Venus means it has a very safe and harmonious attitude, right? What does Venus value when it's in Taurus? It values reality, it values earthly things. So Venus in Taurus tends to be very sensual, sensory motivated, right? It finds beauty in the natural world, and it tends to find beauty in the physical appearance of people. It tends to be attracted to a lot of the physical elements of humanity. It's a very safe sign because it's trying to find harmony within and value within the earthly realm, which means it's a naturally very peaceful, very stable, and consistent sign, especially as a fixed sign. So Taurus is very, very safe, peaceful, passive, very feminine, but very sensual and very artistic because it knows how to put its expressive quality into the physical reality. Opposite to Taurus, what do you have? You have Scorpio. And Scorpio is a troubled sign. It's malefic ruled. It's ruled by Mars. We will notice that the Venus ruled signs are both opposite to the Mars ruled signs. And Venus and Mars in many ways are kind of opposites, right? Mars being the feminine. Mars being the masculine dynamic, Venus being the feminine dynamic, immediately kind of going out from the moon. So Scorpio is a fixed water sign, and that is a paradox. It's also water, which is an element that deals with the non-reality, deals with the spiritual, the emotional, the intuitive, ruled by a planet that's about action. And so Scorpio is very intense and very intimate with things, and it fixates on things, and it holds on to emotions. But the thing is you can't have harmony in a sign that's ruled by Mars, because Mars is about action and conflict and doing things for myself. And so the reason that Venus is naturally in detriment in the Mars-ruled signs is because Venus is in a place where it can't naturally find a way to value things in a harmonious way, because it's too focused on what I want. And when I'm focused on what I want, I can't really focus on what you want. So that's the underlying dynamic. I would say additionally, Scorpio is very turbulent, right? It has a lot of raging emotions, and it's trying to hold on to them and trying to find stability through those emotions. And so it has to learn to let go of the ones that are negative. But that's a hard process, right? Especially for Venus, which wants to be very sensual and very value-oriented. And it's hard to value things that are intangible, especially when they're very singularly focused, like Scorpio. Now, the other Venus-ruled sign is going to be Libra. Libra is an air sign, and it's cardinal. This one's kind of weird, and kind of when you think about it at first glance, kind of doesn't make sense for Venus, but then it kind of does. So it's an air sign, which means it's social, it's intellectual, and it's cardinal, which means it's about action, right? It's about initiating change. But when you put Venus in an air sign, what do you get? You get somebody who values what? People. Values intellect, structure, organization. And so one of the big differences with Libra being in Taurus versus Libra is you get somebody who's got a very geometric style of beauty. It's very organized. Taurus is very natural, smooth, and I would say very creative. Not abstract by any means, but it's very creative. But a Libra Venus is very, very geometric in its kind of beauty orientation. But what does Libra value? What is it trying to find harmony? It's trying to find harmony and value in people and in intellectual systems. And so Venus in Libra is very good at taking multiple points of views and harmonizing them, right? Finding the value in all people. And by doing so, it can work with everyone and become naturally a good mediator and good at handling people and very receptive. This is why Libra's symbol is the scales, because it kind of takes that balanced approach. And so with Venus and Libra, you get somebody who's very balanced, right? Who's a balanced approach to the way they relate to people. Intellectually also, that means that, like I said, they're kind of the way they'll value their intellectual thought will take a balanced approach. Let me see all sides, all points of view, right? Because then I can make a just and fair decision. Libra is opposite to Aries, and Aries, much like Scorpio, is ruled by Mars, and it is a very singularly focused sign that's about taking action for myself right now. I see something I want, I grab it, right? I want to go that way, I move that way. There's no hesitation with Aries. So when Venus is in Aries, you get somebody whose sense of value is very self-focused, right? It's not focused on the values of other people. It's not focused on the values of other thoughts and ideas. It's focused on what? It's valuing my own actions, my own purpose, my own desire. That's it. And so you get somebody who tends to relate in I don't want to say selfish, because they can be very selfless, especially if their chart suggests it. But the kind of the valuation style, the beauty style, is much more self-oriented with Venus and Aries. And this is why it's difficult for Venus to be in the Mars-ruled signs. Now, Venus is exalted in Pisces, and which means it's going to be in fall in Virgo. Venus is exalted in Pisces. It's a water sign like Scorpio, so maybe you think, that seems kind of weird. But it's ruled by Jupiter, and it's mutable, which Pisces is, you could think of Pisces in many ways as kind of infinite. It expands outwards. It's like taking everything and putting it into one, and all things becoming whole as it expands over everything. It's like the deep ocean. You throw things in the ocean, they're just part of the ocean now, right? And that's what Pisces kind of is. And so when you put Venus in Pisces, you get somebody whose ability to value covers all things, because that's what Pisces does. It can become all things, right? Their ability to value can become anything, can become anyone, can be for anything and anyone. So in many ways, you could look at it and say that Venus in Pisces is somebody who has the capacity for very unconditional love towards anyone and everything. That's why it's exalted there. The challenge with Venus in Pisces is you get somebody who can't always nail down what they value specifically, because they just value everything. And when you value things, what are you going to do? You're going to treat it nicely, right? And that's why Venus in Pisces is exalted, because it relates to everything as if it was itself, right? It has a very wholesome approach to everyone and everything. Now, Venus in Virgo then, it's not the opposite in the sense of it values nothing, but rather it values things that are broken. It values things that need fixing. Virgo's the fixer. Virgo's focused on the details. It's very practical and prudent, and it hones in on everything at a microscopic level to see all the nuances and to fix all the tiny little cracks. So when you have Venus and Virgo, what do you get? You get somebody who's constantly honed in on all their mistakes, on all their flaws and all the flaws of other people. And the heart of Venus and Virgo is to fix them. But the problem is when you are always focusing on the flaws, it can be hard to deal with on a relational level. And then from a self-worth point of view, right? The problem with the Venus in Virgo is you get a sense of self-worth that's constantly under pressure because you're constantly looking at all your mistakes, right? It's very self-critical. And when you're very self-critical, it's hard to have a high self-worth. I say this as somebody who has Venus in Virgo, so I understand. But it's a very challenging place, right? And that's why it's in fall. Now, last thing in regards to Venus is it finds its joy in the fifth house, right? Each of the houses, not all the houses, but some of the houses have a planet that finds their joy there. And what that means is that it takes on a little bit of the quality of that planet. And which house is the fifth house? Fifth house deals with what? Our creativity. It deals with the things we create, our children, our self-expression. Also, our pleasures, the things we find fun and enjoyable, and the things we get passionate about. So Venus is going to represent, or Venus is going to be happy in the fifth house because it's in a place that's naturally attuned to the things Venus already represents in many ways. One other thing that's interesting to note is the fifth house is also trine to the ninth and the first. The first being the house of self, the ninth being the, I call it house of worldview, but it's really about expanding our horizons. But the ninth house is the joy of the sun. And so the Venus being in the fifth means it has easy access to. It's a nice extension from the joy of the sun. And Mercury, being the joy of the first house, is also trine the joy of the sun, the ninth house. So it's interesting that the two inner planets from a house joy perspective are trine their solar counterpart. Why? Because again, they're kind of extensions of it. Mercury being the extension through the mind, through thinking, learning, and Venus through self-expression, creativity, right? Because that's a form of value being poured outward, being pushed outward into the world. So that's everything with Venus. I think that the next episode will be, I'll take a look at the outer planets and kind of what sets them apart more specifically, kind of like we did an episode for the inner planets. And then from there, we'll move through each of the outer planets in turn. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for listening. And if you are interested in a reading, I am a professional astrologer, and I'd be happy to do a reading for you. You can reach out to me at, find me at james@jdastrology.com. So again, thanks for listening, and I will see you next week.